Michael alcoholic. Recovery in a nutshell. Because I'm wearing the Alice in Chains shirt, or?
Yeah.
So grateful to be here. Thanks, Chris. It's actually Chris D's birthday today, heavenly birthday. Like Chris said, we were here together in 2017, 2018. And then I came back in 2023, stayed till 2025. And, you know, I know a lot of you in this room, love a lot of you in this room. And I've also lost a lot of people that I, you know, loved and cared for, that I used to sit in this room with. Way more than I care to mention, but you know, it just happens to be a couple people's birthdays today that are no longer with us. I saw them pop up on Facebook, and it just, the amount of times that happens through the year is just, it's our reality, you know. I'm grateful today that, like, at least right now in this moment, like I have a pretty good understanding of what I suffer from, that, like, without a connection to you all, which has given me a connection to a power greater than myself, which keeps me from picking up that first one. And I'll give you the, you know, Brian knows my whole story. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of the experience part, because if you're here, chances are you know how to drink and use. But that being said, it's part of the deal. So, grew up right outside of Boston, Massachusetts. You know, functional, dysfunctional, Irish, Italian, Catholic family. Like, you know, I didn't feel like we were any different from anybody in my neighborhood, and you know, from a very early age, and I don't think it's just an alcoholic addict thing. I think when we become teenagers, it's like you're searching for validation and comparing your inside to people's outsides. I just happened to do it throughout my entire existence until recently. And you know, that first manifested in sports. I was a big hockey player. And music is my, like, hockey and music were my two things, and then women came along and ruined everything. Just kidding. But seriously, like, you know, drugs, alcohol were 1A, and relationships were probably 1B. And, you know, trying to have somebody else or something else, whether it was skating really fast or standing on stage performing music, or you know, having a person tell me that they loved me, was more important to me than that's how I you know, identified. It was like, I'm a hockey player, I'm a musician, you know, I'm dating this person. And you know, this is, my sponsor always says life is lived forwards and learned backwards. So it wasn't like I was a teenager or in my 20s understanding any of these patterns, but when I look back, I can see them. You know, I got arrested a couple of times in high school for drinking, but it was like, it seemed like a rite of passage to me, at least kids I grew up with. And it was just kind of swept under the rug, nothing really happened. I went to prep school for a year to get my grades and body up to play college hockey, and had a devastating knee injury, you know, surgery, slept in a machine for a few months. This was in 1996. I was 18 years old, and happened to be the same year that Oxycontin came on the market too, which, lucky me. Yeah, but like I still was very much identified as that athlete, even though doctors told me I wouldn't play again. I was like, fuck you, you know, you tell me I'm not gonna do something, like, I'm gonna do everything in my power. And like, the only reason I bring that up is because I had this devastating injury, and I had doctors and nurses, trainers and coaches telling me exactly what I needed to do to rehabilitate my knee to be able to play hockey again. and that was when I was 18. So fast forward 12 years, when I'm you know, in and out of detoxes, and my life is spiraling out of control. I'm being told by, you know, people in the fellowships, by counselors, by therapists, by sponsors, like exactly what I need to do to recover from this disease that's going to kill me. And at that point in time, like, I just took it cafeteria style. You know, I took what I thought I needed, and I left the rest. And it's it gives you a pretty good idea of like where my values were, or how much I valued myself, I should say. So, but anyway, you know, I get out of prep school. I did end up playing hockey. I did end up going to college and playing hockey. But, you know, once I got to a place where I went to school in Southern Connecticut, and like, you know, it's just far enough away from Boston, and like I can't tell you one thing. I was there for 4.5 years. I can't tell you one thing that I learned. You know, I lied, cheated, and manipulated my way through a pretty good college, just to stay on the ice. And that, you know, that would become a pattern in my addiction. Like, it didn't matter what the rules were. It didn't matter what I was supposed to be doing. Like, I was driven by selfishness and self-centeredness and fear and dishonesty, and like, that's like the earliest time that I can, there's earlier times when I was younger, but where I can really see that I did that. And you know, after a few years and you know, another knee surgery and a bunch of concussions, I was done playing hockey. I decided I was going to switch my focus to music, and all this time, you know, I'm being introduced to new drugs. You know, it wasn't just smoking weed and drinking and doing mushrooms anymore. It was like cocaine became a big part of, you know, cocaine, ecstasy, stuff like that. Going to raves. It was the late '90s. It was, you know, it was a great time to be alive. And you know, I got out of school and I did what any rational person that had no money, no connections or music opportunities. I picked up all my stuff and I moved to Southern California with like $150 to my name, and I brought myself with me out there. You know, my disease really sped up out there. Started getting in trouble with the law. You know, I had an enabling girlfriend. You know, I didn't, like, all I did was chase the music. I didn't work. You know, I couldn't hold a regular job for more than a couple of months. And, you know, I stayed out there for about a year and then moved back to Boston. And my 20s are just, you know, they were just a blur. But, you know, the consequences, because I was a blackout drinker and got in a lot of fights, got in a lot of difficult situations with police, getting pulled over, and when I rediscovered opiates, it changed the game for me. You know, I was in a relationship, and the girl had an abortion, and it was something that it wasn't my child. When she found out it wasn't mine, it's a soap opera story. But like, bottom line was, I didn't do anything to help or hurt that situation. I just kind of let it happen. But I felt a loss, you know, a shame, a guilt that I'd never felt before. And after like a couple months of just being, you know, moping around, my girlfriend put these 2 pills in front of me. It was an OC and it was a 30, and she was like, "I'm sick of you, like, just kind of walling around your old self-pity, like, try one of these, see if this helps." And the only thing I can compare it to is that movie Bradley Cooper was in, for like
Limitless?
Yeah. Like, I was like, whoa, like, that was the moment that I, you know, and this was, you know, I'd been drinking and using for years, but like, that moment, it was able to take away not physical pain, but emotional pain. And not only that, but it gave me the confidence that I lacked in myself, and I didn't have to drink as much, which was causing problems in my music career and every other aspect of my life, because I was a crash test dummy, you know. And so, you know, I was able to drive, I was able to perform, I was able to, you know, talk to people, and I thought that I found the magical elixir, and like most things, I had no idea what the power of that medication was, and you know, I was doing a lot of cool things in music at the time, and people were just giving me drugs, and that was like the last period of time in my life where that ever happened. But you know, it was enough to catch a pretty sick habit. You know, I would go to other cities, or like go down south or out west, and my drug dealer would give me these little pills that I found out later on were methadone, and I had no idea. He just gave them to me because he didn't want me to be sick, and like he was like telling me how to take them, and I did that, came back, and then he just started the whole process over again. And didn't end up going to my first treatment until I was 30 years old. I was seeing, one of my friends was on tour, and he was like, "You got to see this guy that I'm on tour with." And he was on tour with Tech Nine, and I didn't know who Tech Nine was at the time. This was 2008, and so I went there, but I didn't have any of my pills, and I hadn't really experienced dope sickness. Like, that's how like well fed I was over a couple of year period. And I thought I had like the flu or something, but I didn't have any of the pills. We're going to the show in Providence, and so I went back to Old Faithful, you know, Long Island iced teas, and, you know, just dragged myself into a blackout, and ended up getting beat up pretty bad by the Providence Police Department in front of the club and in the back of the squad car. And you know, when I woke up, I'd waken up in so many drunk tanks over the years, and like, you know, I was ready for them to just give me my shit, let me leave, and they were like, "No, you hit a cop, like you're not going anywhere." And I was like, shit. It was on Mother's Day 2008. But you know, there was a detective that, I don't know if he had somebody in his life that was an addict or an alcoholic or something, but he definitely took pity on me, and he said, you know, asked if I had ever been to treatment. I didn't know what he was talking about, and he said, you know, if you go to a program, come back to court, show us that you want it completed, you know, we'll get it turned into a continue without a finding, and just don't ever come back to Providence. And I was like, all right, done. And I went to a detox somewhere in Mass. I can't remember the name of it, but I remember two things from going to that detox. There was a commitment that came through, you know, like there was H&I that came through. I don't know if it was AA or NA. I just remember them saying the Serenity Prayer. I'd never heard that prayer before, but it kind of woke up something in my soul. Because when I was younger, I was a real spiritual kid. I never had a problem with the idea of God, and the beauty and the simplicity of that prayer. Just it definitely woke something up in me. But then there was this other kid from Quincy that told me that I was spending way too much money on pills, and that heroin was the same thing. And so those were the two things I remember leaving with. And I didn't know what post-acute withdrawal syndrome was. I didn't know what drugs and alcohol had been doing to the neural pathways in my brain over the last, you know, decade and a half. And now this is the first time I'm without my medicine, and I'm walking around my parents' neighborhood after being in treatment for like 10 days or something foolish, and just saying that Serenity Prayer over and over again. Because my conception of faith at that time was more like Santa Claus, you know, or a vending machine. I wanted serenity, and I wanted it now. You know, that's why I became a IV drug addict, because like that was ended up in the progression being the quickest way that I could get to where I needed to be. But at that time, I wanted and needed God, but I had no idea what like faith without works is dead. Like, I didn't know what that meant. So I'm saying this over and over, you know, probably, and I'm getting this gut-wrenching anxiety. I felt like somebody had a hand around my throat, and I lasted maybe 10 minutes, and then I called that kid from Quincy, you know, and the next 8 years of my life would be just an absolute train wreck, you know, and like music opportunities all went away. You know, I'm watching some of my friends become, you know, legitimately famous and make careers for themselves, and I'm watching my friends from college and hockey and high school, you know, get married and buy houses and have kids and, you know, have regular lives, and I couldn't understand why I just couldn't stop doing this. And I would go to, you know, 40, 50 detoxes over the next 8 years, a bunch of 1 month programs. You know, I go to California, to Arizona, like just, I got more scholarships to rehab than I ever did hockey, you know. But everywhere I went, like, and I don't, back then, like, people weren't dropping like flies, like they ended up with fentanyl. And so, like, I had an opportunity to make a lot of mistakes for whatever reason. You know, the 30 plus people I have on my phone that are no longer with us that didn't have that opportunity. It just, I stopped asking, you know, why I didn't, because like it ended up being all the things that happens to a low bottom alcoholic or drug addict, you know, just cellulitis, MRSA, Hep C, overdoses, homelessness, and East Coast homelessness, and the West Coast homelessness, and wherever Minnesota is. And that's what life looked like. And at the end of it, it was the only people left in my life were my parents, you know, who had to witness things that, like, it just being a dad now, like it sucks, but that was, you know, that was my road, and they stuck by me. And so in 2016, when I was doing what I do, I was just running around trading my food stamps for dope, and, you know, like, you know, hanging out as much as I could stand being homeless for a week or two, you know, in the wintertime. Like, I thank God for Mass Health, because I could just check into a detox, and like that was just completely normal to me. And I was in this place called the Dimmick in Roxbury. I don't know if anybody knows Boston, but Roxbury, Massachusetts is very different from Roxbury, New Jersey. But it was like one of the places I felt most at home. It was one of the places that gave you the most methadone, and you know what I mean? Like, it was my spot. And I'd call to check in, you know, I hadn't talked to my family probably in like a month, and I would find out later on when I was at the lodge that when they did the intervention, like, all the nights that my mother and my sister were calling, you know, police stations and hospitals and places like that. But, you know, at that point, anytime I called, they were just happy to hear my voice and didn't want to scare me off. But this time I called, they were like, you know, Robbie wants you to come out to Minnesota with him. And Rob was a guy I played college hockey with, and we went down the rabbit hole of OCs and 30s together, and he had gotten sober in 2011. He went to Alena Lodge in New Jersey. He was another Boston guy, and, you know, he was the only example of somebody that I knew that I used with, that used like I used, and seemed to be free of this thing. And, you know, so for 4.5 years or whatever it was, so to 2016, he would send me a text every day, like a daily reflections or something like that, not knowing where I was or what I was doing, but like, so it was my parents and Rob, those are the three people that like absolutely never, ever gave up on me. And and I always looked up to him. You know, he was a year ahead of me, we both played defense, like he's just like, he still is to this day, like one of the coolest people you ever meet. And so, when they said his name, and I was a runner, I'd mentioned I'd been to a lot of treatment centers in different states, because like, geographic cures felt like they were cures to me. you know, because I'm so terrified of being in this spot right now, but really what it was being in my own skin, which you gotta bring that skin with you wherever you go. So when they said his name, I said, sure, absolutely, come pick me up. And it was January, and anybody who agrees to move to Minnesota in January, there's something seriously wrong with them, because it is like I'm from Boston and it's cold up there, but this was like a different kind of cold. I actually quit smoking. I haven't smoked since 2016 because it was so fucking cold there. I couldn't go outside. And you know, it almost didn't make the trip. My parents brought me to the airport, not knowing, you know, they're probably breathing a sigh of relief. Like they're literally at the airport with me, like sending me to this guy who they know very well, who used to be like me, who they knew that very well, you know, and probably were feeling some hope for the first time. And I ended up overdosing in the bathroom at the airport, and you know, my father had to give me CPR while the EMTs and firefighter and everybody came. You know, it's Friday morning at an international airport. My mom's screaming outside the bathroom. It's like chaos. And like my father's a Vietnam vet, like combat veteran, like, and he was more shook up by this than anything else he'd ever experienced in his life. And I had no idea. You know, I woke up, actually the guy that Narcaned me was one of my oldest friends. And I was actually the last person with his brother before his brother died like 20 years prior, which is wild. He was the first face that I saw when I woke up, and I was like, Marky? And he's like, hey, welcome back, brother. Big smile on his face. And I was like, can I sit on the plane? And he was like, no, you can't get on the fucking plane. You're just dead. Yeah. And so, you know, went to Mass General, came out, did get on that plane, did go out to Minnesota, was scared to death at this point. It wasn't the first time I overdosed, but it was the first time like the blood had splattered on my parents. And my mom wasn't talking to me, she just couldn't talk. And everyone was just pretty much waiting for me to die. You know, my brother told me that after I had gotten out of the lodge. And so I went to a place called The Retreat. It's a 30-day program in Wayzata, I think, Minnesota. And it's a big book-based program. It's ran by like 90% volunteers, people from AA. And there was a big book study there that had just started when I got there, and it was 3 weeks long. And the guy that was giving the class was really armed with the facts about himself and about this disease and about the recovery process, and he was able to go through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous in a way that was very attractive to me. You know, I'd heard and read that book for years, like for 8 years at that point, but the way that he presented it was powerful, and I jumped into that with the desperation of a drowning man, and really I started getting armed with information, and unfortunately, information isn't going to cut it for somebody who's all the way down the scale as I am, and I oftentimes in 30, 60, 90-day programs would mistake feeling better for being better. And I'm sure plenty of you in here can identify with that, you know. And this was one of the cases. You know, I was willing. You know, I was excited about the book. I was willing to do the things they were suggesting, but like not all of them. You know what I mean? Like if I can't, like I'm not going to listen to what anybody says about this girl that I met at the retreat. You know, we didn't have a 60-day coin between the two of us, but we thought it was a good idea to like shack up together. And then, you know, she broke up with me before I was 90 days sober, and I was heartbroken. You know, we were going to spend the rest of our lives together. And it was back to, you know, the focus was back to me, you know, and that four horsemen or the bedevilments, like whatever you wanna use, like I just could not stand being myself sober. Just couldn't stand it. And it got to the point I was trading my medication for people's sleeping pills, cause I started going to sleep at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, cause I just couldn't stand to be awake, you know. But for somebody like me who's had a solution, and drinking and drugs was my solution for a very long time. And I had that solution for, like, you walk into the woods for 20 years, like, you're not walking out in 30 days or 90 days. And so that didn't last too long until, like, you know, somebody had told me, my first sponsor there in Minnesota was like, don't ever go to North Minneapolis. I'm just telling you, right? He was a Jersey kid. He was like, I'm telling you, Skinny, don't ever go there. Like, don't even go near it. You're not allowed. I'm like, all right, I'll log that one in the back of my brain. Yeah. And sure enough, the day came. I was like 92 days sober, and I had the opportunity. My friend Rob, who had brought me out there, paid for me to go to treatment, paid for me to go to sober living. You know, introduced me to. I knew nobody but sober people in the state of Minnesota. Every single person I knew was sober. And he let me stay at his condo for a weekend, you know, kind of as like a 90-day, like, you know, attaboy, because he was going out of town for business. And I lasted one night, you know, but when Saturday came, like, I literally met with my sponsor at a coffee shop, walked out of the coffee shop, pulled up Google Maps, and was like, I'm in the North Loop. I feel like North Minneapolis needs to be like really close to here. And it was. And took me all of 10 minutes. You know, I walk into, it doesn't matter if it's South Central Los Angeles, North Minneapolis, or Baghdad, like I'm gonna figure out who has what I need, and I'm gonna be able to get it very quickly, cause I don't care. And that's what I did. You know, so in a town where I knew nothing, no one but sober people, I ended up living in a tent with, you know, shooting meth and heroin on the side of the road in Washington and Broadway meet in North Minneapolis. And luckily I had my friend who understands this disease and wasn't willing to give up on me. He had lost his own brother to an overdose, and you know, he was like, I'm not gonna lose another one. And he got me another scholarship to a place called Alina Lodge, which I know a lot of you know. And that was back when it was a year-long program, and changed my life. You know, I got into I dealt with a lot of stuff in there. You know, I saw that the alcohol and the drugs had very little to do with my emotional imbalances. You know, and went through, like, did everything and more that I was asked of me there. And then when I was done there, like, I didn't use a phone for a year, didn't use the internet for a year, you couldn't talk to girls, you couldn't lift weights, like, you know, at the time there was no nicotine or caffeine. You know, a lot of people just opted to go back to jail rather than stay there. But I stuck it out, and the first person I talked to on the phone in almost 350 days, I think, was Nicoletta. And I didn't know Nicoletta, so you can imagine. I was like, hello. You know, she was like, oh, you got to do this and that. And I'm like, all right, I'll see you soon. And I get here, and my Excel at the time didn't take my insurance, so like, yeah, we had to get in a van and go to New Pathways, yeah. And she was like, yeah, you have to go to this intensive outpatient, you know, 5 days a week or some madness. And I was like, I was just in intensive, this is in my head, I'm like, I was just in intensive inpatient for a year. And now I gotta go to intensive, and I'm at a sober house, and she's saying, and I just said, okay. You know, and I stayed at that outpatient until they told me it was time to leave. I never asked when I was supposed to leave. And I stayed here for about a year, and you know, I met Chris and a lot of people that like I said earlier, that are no longer here, and some that are very close to me. You know, my wife being one of them. Not sure I recommend that, but it's just kind of how the cards fell, and you know, so, and so I leave here in April of 2018, and that guy Rob, who, you know, brought me out to Minnesota, picked me up off the street, sent me to New Jersey, offered me a job when I was like, you know, just about 2 years sober. And, you know, 7.5 years later, I'm still working for him today. But it has not been all puppy dogs and ice cream. You know, I had 5 years of sobriety, and for me, speaking here, this is probably the most, you know, any point that I can get across, or thing that you might want to pay attention to if it's your first time here, if it's your second time here, if you just got back, whatever it is like, I loved being sober the first time around. Like that freedom, like I got reintroduced to playing music again, and working for CARES, and meeting, you know, Vicky and Lorraine at Life Center Stage, and, you know, Chris and I and a bunch of guys, we would do cool shit, and then getting a job back home in Boston, a place that I could not stay sober to save my life. You know, making decent money, working for the guy who literally helped to save my life, and being reconnected with that family that I horrified, living at their house without them, you know, worrying. I'm sure they're probably still worried a little bit, but like, you know, the entire time I was there, the 1.5 years I was there, coming home every single night, and, you know, being present for the first time, probably since I was a kid. It was beautiful. And then my girlfriend at the time was in New Jersey, and Rob's fiance at the time was in New Jersey, and this other guy, Joey D. You know the Joey D? Couple of New York City guys. His girlfriend was from New Jersey, and so Rob moved the company down to New Jersey, to Monmouth County, and this was in 2019. And I got engaged. My fiance moved in with me. But when I got down to Monmouth County, I didn't do what I did when I came to Dover from Alena Lodge. Like, first thing I did when I got here, other than like buy a tin of dip and a Monster, was like go and get a home group and get a sponsor, and start working the steps, and giving back as much as I could. I didn't do that and then I did that again when I went to Boston. And I come down to Monmouth County, I'm a few years sober, you know, I love being sober. I know all the things, and I obviously say that kidding, but like, I just, you know, work was busy, and then, you know, so I kind of came in on like on a low. I didn't feel it. Like, things felt okay. Like, I hit a couple meetings, but I didn't get plugged in. I didn't get a sponsor. You know, it was an hour away from Dover. This is where my network was in New Jersey. And then all of a sudden a worldwide pandemic hits. And I have a job that I can work from remotely. And, you know, having those isms, the workaholic, you know, kicked on because there was nothing else to do. After a while, working 10 to 12 hours on a computer, I'm like, I don't want to go to a meeting on a computer right now. Plus, it's not real AA, so like, you know, it's been about 6 months. Like, I think I can kind of lay off those. Still don't have a sponsor. The only sponsee I had was, you know, he was all set, and little by slow, like, half of my brain started selling bullshit, the other half started buying it, and like, I give myself too much of my own counsel. Like, I'm in big trouble. Like, I need other people that knows what it's like to be us, to reflect me, because I'm never going to be able to see 100% of the truth about myself, and I didn't have that, and I figured, why not? Like, during the pandemic, engaged, let's move the wedding up a year and have it in 2020 at an Airbnb, and you know, let's buy a house and a couple cars and then get pregnant on our honeymoon. You know, there wasn't anybody to say to me other than my therapist, which I didn't listen to at all. It's like, you wanna maybe take each experience and you know, hold it for a little bit, honor it for a little bit. I was like, nope, let's, you know, two alcoholics getting together, we do things alcoholically. So, you know, next thing you know, I'm picking up things over the counter like Kratom and CBD and whatever, just telling myself that it was because I was working out real hard, and you know, Advil breaks the blood-brain barrier, so I didn't want to take that. And I heard some guy in jiu-jitsu takes Kratom, so you know, I couldn't see that I was bullshitting myself. And I was talking to Joey about this outside, but my ego was still wanted to hold on to my sobriety. I didn't want to go on a run. I didn't want to go back to where I was. They say that you, when you pick up, you know, it's a progressive disease. You pick up not where you left off, but it's doing push-ups in the parking lot or whatever. My experience is that has happened, but it's also, you don't fucking know. Mine was 2.5 years of death by 1,000 paper cuts. I inflicted more emotional abuse on my family than I probably would have done if I was out just running the streets by myself. You know, I was restless, irritable, and discontent is not even that would be kind. I was very, and anybody who was here when I got here, I was very angry. David knows probably more than anybody. And so my life kind of looked like, I called Nicoletta because I was sleeping at my office because my wife didn't want me home because I was just, you know, we had a 2-year-old and I was just not a great person to have around. And I had to get on Suboxone to get off of Kratom, which is the wildest thing ever. You know, and I was telling myself all sorts of crazy stories, and finally I called Nicoletta, and I was just like, Nick, I need to. And Nicoletta married my wife and I, by the way. Nicoletta and I very, very close. And I was like, Nick, I gotta come back. And she was like, thank God. Everybody else knew that. And like I said, I wasn't ripping and running and you know, hang gliding off a Dorito. I had some weight on me, and you know, I had a car and a job and a house and a wife and a kid, and you know, I left here with my Irish luggage, you know, and you know, a bus ticket, and I came back with all this stuff, and I was so much more miserable. And then I had the experience of being here for, you know, 15 months, and still my wife didn't want me to come home because I was still so angry. And I ended up getting a new sponsor about a year ago, 2 Julys ago, and kind of told him what was going on with me, and he was like, sounds like you could use a new experience. And I was like, yeah, because when I got here, I just needed to check all the boxes again. I just needed to get back. I wanted to get back to that 5 years. That was 2.5 years ago. And and Nicoletta kept saying, stop comparing to your old recovery. And I didn't know what she was talking about. I'm like, my old recovery was great. You know? And I just wasn't present. You know, I checked all the boxes, got because you can do that. You know, you can try to manage your life seemingly based on spiritual principles and still run it into the ground because you're still managing. And I'm a horrible manager. You know, got demoted as manager in my company, I'm not management material. I like being a worker among workers, you know, and that's just me. And I did go through the work again with this man, and you know, he had me reset my time, which was extremely difficult, and I don't say this to, I won't get into what the medication was, but, you know, I was being prescribed the medication that was non-narcotic, and, you know, a doctor, my wife knew about it, a couple friends knew about it, but I wasn't telling my sponsor, and I didn't tell Nicoletta, and I didn't tell Milestone. And this is a medication that the geniuses in Boston figured out how to, you know, abuse 20 years ago, and I wasn't abusing it this time around, but like I was still being dishonest about it, and he had me reset my time on November 1st when I was doing my 5th step with him, and I was fucking bullshit. You know, I'm like, I haven't gotten high or drunk since April of 2023. And he was like, oh, well, if you want me to keep working with you, you're gonna do that. And at this point, we'd been working together for like 4 months, and like I had seen changes that that were beyond belief, and I decided that, like, because like the fact of the matter was, like, that dishonesty, even like a shred of it was going to lead me back to the same situation where I'm mixed managing and controlling. Like, I need something to manage my mood, you know, rather than digging into what the crux of the issue was. And I'm not saying anything negative about medications or therapists or psychiatrists, any of that. All that stuff is good. But for me right now, not being on any medications since November 1st of 2024, and, you know, waking up every day, connecting with the earth, connecting with my body, connecting with my spirit, you know, showing up for my wife and my daughter, my animals, and being a worker among workers at the office, and showing up for my home group, which is in Summit on Tuesday nights, the Fellowship of the Spirit, and with a lot of you guys, is like what, and continuing to work with my sponsor or work with other guys, is what has given me a freedom and a life beyond my wildest dreams. All the stuff is great, but like the peace of mind that I have every morning and every night when I go to bed is just priceless, and I pray for that and wish that for everybody in here. And we got about 10 minutes left if you guys have any questions.